Hi, I'm James Hamilton from Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal, and this is an essential tutorial about plywood for woodworkers. Plywood should be simple, right? You should be able to just go to the store, buy whatever looks good, and go home and make your project. Unfortunately, it's not that easy because not all plywood is created equal. Two stacks may look the same, but in reality they could be completely different. And what you bought at your store one week may be completely different from what they're selling the next week. That's why you need to understand the fundamentals of how plywood is made, how it's graded, and how it's sold. You'll find this video essential in that regard, even if you're a seasoned woodworker. Believe it or not, I think we can make a subject like plywood interesting for at least a few minutes. Now let's get started. The fact is, most plywood is mostly made from pine or some other soft wood. A lot of new woodworkers are confused by this. They see maple or birch or oak on the little sign at the home center and they assume that's what their plywood's made from. But that label only refers to the veneer on the outside of the sheet. The inner layers are made from softer material like poplar or fir or some type of pine. Even so, these veneered sheets are called hardwood plywood, and they have their own grading system which is based on their appearance. Plywood that's entirely made from softwood, without any hardwood veneers, is really not intended for furniture or cabinetry. It's construction grade material, and its grading system is based upon its strength, not its appearance. Many home centers sell sanded pine plywood that looks okay on one side, but it's usually junk on the inside. I say usually because I have found some 7-layer sanded pine plywood that's halfway decent for shop cabinets. But most of it is just not worth the hassle. We'll talk more about why that is shortly. For now, let's just concentrate on hardwood veneered plywoods. As I said, hardwood plywood is usually softwood with thin layers of hardwood on the outer faces. This doesn't mean it's just construction grade plywood with a fancy dress on. The softer inner layers are of higher quality than the cheaper stuff. But let's concentrate on the outer layers for a moment. The industry has a system to grade the appearance of these outer layers. They assign letters to the quality of the show face and numbers to the quality of the back face. Yes, hardwood veneered plywood has distinct front and back faces, which are graded separately. You have A through E to grade the front and 1 through 4 to grade the back. So you might see an A1 plywood. That's going to look great on both the front and the back. A2 is going to look great on the front, but it might have a few slight flaws on the back. B2 may have those flaws on both the front and the back. And so it goes from A1 to E4 and pretty much everything in between. So when you buy plywood, look for high letters and high numbers so you get the best looking veneers on both sides. If you want some general rules, stick to A's and 1s or 2s for any surface that's going to be visible in the project and that will receive a clear finish. Anything lower than that could be suitable for painted surfaces. If you ever get a chance to visit a plywood factory and see how they rotary cut veneer, take it. It's pretty cool. They shave a tree like a pencil sharpener and the result is a surface that has a repeating pattern, sort of like wallpaper. This is what you find on a lot of cheaper plywoods because it's a very efficient way to make veneer, but it also looks like plywood. That's fine for some cabinets, but furniture looks better with plain cut or book match veneer, giving the appearance of an edge glued or a solid wood panel. This is something that confuses many woodworkers when they choose their plywoods. You see stacks of birch. Maybe you'll see 2 stacks at a home center, and they both look the same. You look on the labels and the veneer grading system says that they're the same. But one costs more than the other. So what's the difference? Well, one has a veneer that's thinner than cheap toilet paper, and the other one is slightly thicker. Most of the cost of a sheet of hardwood plywood is in the veneer. On cheap plywood, it's laughably thin, and all but the lightest sanding will eat the stuff right off. That's the $50 stuff you find in the box stores. And while I have used that in shop projects and painted cabinets, you got to be careful with it. Some stores offer what they call extra thick veneers for about 20% more money. This is a little bit thicker, and it can take some fine grit sanding, but I still wouldn't use it for furniture. For that, you're going to need to special order premium hardwood with true thick veneers. Look for something at least a 1/40 of an inch thick for any surface that will be visible but won't be exposed to wear, and up to a 1/16 of an inch thick for a surface that's going to get bumped or scuffed over time. As I said, even hardwood plywood has soft wood cores inside, but it's not the same thing that's in the cheaper construction grade plywoods. Construction plywood is made from whatever crap they have growing near the mill. It can be made from a variety of woods mixed together with different grains and different moisture contents. You just mash it all together in a big press along with whatever else gets caught among those layers, and there's no thought of consistency. That's why construction plywood bends and twists so much. It's really just intended to be kept flat by fastening it to the frame of a building. The layers that make up the core of hardwood veneered plywood, on the other hand, are usually all of the same species. They're usually dried, and they have small knots and fewer, if any, voids. That's one of the reasons why it's more stable. Another factor is the number of layers. Generally speaking, the more layers your plywood has, the better it's going to be. The less expensive hardwood plywoods have 7 layers, if you count the thin outer veneers as layers. Depending on the thickness, Baltic Birch plywood will have 13 layers. This makes for a stiffer plywood because all that extra glue stiffens each of those layers. And it makes for a more stable sheet due to all the extra thin layers of alternating grain. Plywood with lots of thin layers like Baltic Birch is sometimes called Veneer Core plywood because all those layers are extra thin, like a stack of veneers. And some premium Veneer Core plywood contains no softwood at all. Its layers are hardwood all the way through. This is the strongest, stiffest, most stable, and most expensive of plywoods. The term Baltic Birch has become like Kleenex or Frisbee. It's a general label that's been applied to a wide variety of high-quality Veneer Core plywoods that are imported. These days, your lumber store or retailer's Baltic Birch plywood is probably more likely to have come from Poland than from the Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Russian and Finnish birch is becoming more popular as well. All of it's prized for its stability, but like all European plywood, it comes with its own grading system. In this case, B is the best, followed by BB, and then CP, and then C, which is the worst. The same letter grade applies to both the front and the back faces, so you might run into a BB/CP grade. This means BB for the front, CP for the back. Baltic Birch is very strong and stable because it's made from thin layers of birch throughout, no softwood. It's well suited to cabinet construction, and if you don't mind the layered look on the edges, it can be used for fine furniture as well. It's an ideal material for accurate and durable jigs too. The biggest downside though is the price. It's about twice as much as regular birch veneered plywood you get off the rack at a home center. And while it's sometimes available in 4x8 sheets, the most common size is 5 foot by 5 foot, which I find to be a pain to handle and to store in my shop. Incidentally, the US does make their own Veneer Core Baltic Birch style plywood. It's called Apple Ply, and no, it's not made from apple trees, it's made from birch and alder. A lot of new woodworkers look at Composite Core plywood, which features a thick hardwood veneer on the outside and particle board or MDF on the core inside, as junk. After all, wood's better than a mix of sawdust and glue, right? But many high-end cabinet makers actually prefer MDF core in certain situations. Why? Because it's more stable, something that's really important in cabinets like frameless ones. In fact, the Architectural Woodworking Institute, which is the organization that certifies the quality of commercially manufactured cabinetry, they require composite core plywoods for certain applications, like frameless cabinet doors. So if you want their little label on your product, which they all do, you have to use it. Of course, the downside of MDF and particle board cores are the structural problems. Screws don't hold well, and even glue is iffy if you don't have a good mechanical joint. It'll also sag if it's not well supported. For this reason, you have to have a really thick core on the outside, and generally, I just avoid composite core plywood. I especially don't use it for drawers and never for fine furniture. As if all these veneers and cores weren't confusing enough, let's talk about overall thickness. You see, 3/4 inch plywood is almost never 3/4 of an inch thick. If it's construction grade plywood, it can literally be any thickness because the moisture content was all over the place when they mashed it together, so who knows what it is now that it's dried out. But even hardwood veneered plywood is typically undersized by American standards because it's most likely imported from a country where they use the metric system. Anyway, don't plow a dado with a 3/4 inch router bit and then expect your 3/4 inch plywood to fit inside it. Instead, use an undersized plywood bit set. I'll link to the one I use in the notes below this video. Of course, even undersized plywood may be thicker or thinner than you would expect. Bob Lang did some testing for Popular Woodworking a few years back, and he found a variation as much as 22 thousandths of an inch from corner to corner on the same sheet of plywood. Why the inconsistency? Well, it's because wood is inconsistent. Some fibers are denser than others, and when the core layers are compressed during the manufacturing process, different areas can compress more, and then those inconsistencies are picked up by the adjacent layer and so on throughout the sheet. It's really impossible to predict or to avoid. Luckily, almost all the quality plywood that they tested showed very small variations, just about a couple thousandths of an inch from corner to corner. Even so, it always pays to make test cuts and properly fit your joinery when working with plywood, but that's a subject for another video. I hope this tutorial answers some of your questions and helps you select the right plywood for your next project. You may even want to bookmark it for future reference. For more great tips, tricks, and tutorials designed to make you a better woodworker, check out Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. You can read and subscribe for free at stumpynubs.com.